My story didn't unfold as I'd planned on that cold Thursday. Instead of a seamless trip to a business conference in Denver, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of unexpected delays and unsettling revelations. My wife, Claudia, usually sent me off with warm hugs and tender goodbyes, but this time, her send-off was abrupt, just a quick peck on the cheek before she dashed off to work. Let me introduce myself. I'm Luke, 48 years old, married to Claudia for 23 years. Together, we've built a life and raised two wonderful children, Ethan, 21, and Harper, 19. Yet, on that fateful day, my world started to unravel. I left the office at 3 p.m., heading straight to LAX for my 6 p.m. flight. As always, I arrived early, eager to avoid the stress of last-minute boarding. Everything seemed routine until the announcement came: flight delayed due to severe weather in Colorado. The delay stretched into hours, and by the time we finally boarded, exhaustion had begun to set in. As the plane lifted off, I tried to relax, telling myself the delay was nothing more than a minor hiccup. But halfway through the flight, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, his tone grim. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to worsening weather conditions, we are unable to land in Denver. We will be returning to Los Angeles. Excuse me, performers. My neighbor has run away with my boyfriend." The plane made a wide arc back to LAX, and frustration bubbled within me. As soon as we touched down, I scrambled to the airline desk, securing a seat on the first flight out the next morning. Though I missed the evening's conference, I consoled myself with the thought of a few unexpected hours at home, as in my conference room. Eager to surprise Claudia, I called her from the terminal. To my shock, she didn't pick up. Odd, I thought. She's usually home by now. Driving home, unease began to creep in. When I arrived, her car wasn't in the driveway, and the house was dark. As I stepped inside, a strange tension filled the air. The television was on, blaring softly in the background. A detail that immediately struck me as off. Claudia hated leaving the TV on. I turned it off and called her again. This time she answered. "Hi, Luke," she said, her voice warm but distracted. "How's the trip going?" "I'm home," I blurted, unable to contain my frustration. "More? What? Why?" Claudia's tone shifted sharply, a mix of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. "The flight was canceled. I'll tell you more when you get home." There was a pause, long enough to stir my suspicions. "I'm running errands," she said finally. "I'll be back in an hour." As the call ended, I sat in the silence of our living room, my thoughts racing. Her voice, was it nervousness I detected, or something else entirely? But deep inside, I knew it was nervousness. The hours stretched unbearably long as I sat alone in the house. Every minute that ticked by added weight to the growing knot in my chest. Claudia's tone during our call echoed in my mind. Offhand, almost evasive. She had never sounded like that before. Finally, headlights illuminated the driveway, and moments later, the front door creaked open. Claudia stepped inside, balancing a couple of shopping bags. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her face was haggard, and the corners of her mouth trembled, and she put down her groceries. "You're back earlier than I expected," she said lightly, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. I tried to match her casual demeanor, but the words came out sharper than I intended. "Where were you?" Her movements froze briefly before she resumed unpacking. "I told you. I had errands. Groceries, mostly." "Ah," he thought. Most people were too proud to mention it. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "Since when do you leave the TV on when you leave the house?" Claudia's head snapped up, her brow furrowing. I didn't leave it on. You must have. She stopped herself, realizing the futility of the statement. I checked when I got home, Claudia. It wasn't me. Her face flushed slightly and she busied herself with unpacking, her back turned to me. Maybe I forgot, she mumbled. The uneasy silence settled between us like a thick fog. As much as I wanted to believe her, the details didn't add up. She wasn't careless, especially about things like this. After dinner, Claudia retreated to the bedroom, claiming exhaustion. I sat on the couch, unable to shake the nagging feeling in my gut. Something was off and I couldn't let it go. I went to the chest of drawers and took out some clothes. I ran my fingers over some of the clothes and cleared my mind. As I sat there, my gaze fell on her purse, sitting on the coffee table. A flicker of hesitation ran through me. We'd always respected each other's privacy. But now, with trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was her wallet, a pack of gum, and scattered receipts. One caught my eye. A receipt from an upscale bistro across town. Bistro Verona. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. Yesterday's date. A sinking feeling gripped me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had dinner with a friend? Maybe it was work? But Claudia hadn't mentioned anything, and the bistro wasn't the kind of place she usually went for casual outings. No, I couldn't confront her yet, not without more answers. The next day I left the house early, under the pretense of running errands. Instead, I drove to Bistro Verona. The elegant restaurant stood proudly in the bustling downtown district, its large windows giving passers-by a glimpse of its cozy candlelit interior. I walked in and approached the host. "Hi, I was wondering if you could help me. My wife mentioned she was here a few nights ago, and I'd like to surprise her by recreating the evening. Could you tell me if she was here?" The host hesitated, glancing around before pulling out a reservations book. "What's the name?" "Claudia Whitman." He scanned the pages, his finger landing on an entry. "Ah, yes. She was here yesterday evening, around 7:30, I believe. She liked what you wrote on social media. She downloaded Facebook and Instagram." "And was she alone?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The host's smile faltered. No, sir. She was with a man. I think his name was..." He flipped through the notes. Alan. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I barely muttered a thank you before stumbling out of the restaurant, my heart pounding in my chest. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was one I didn't want to see. Driving home, my thoughts raced. Alan. I racked my brain trying to place the name. Was he someone from Claudia's work? A friend I hadn't met? The answer eluded me, but my unease only deepened. I didn't confront her that evening. Instead, I played the role of the attentive husband, silently observing. Claudia seemed normal, almost too normal. She chatted about her day, asked about my delayed flight, and even suggested we watch a movie together. But beneath the surface, her nervous energy was palpable. That night, while she slept, I unlocked her phone. It felt wrong, invasive even, but my trust had already begun to crack. Scrolling through her messages, I found nothing unusual at first. Then I noticed a thread with someone saved as AR. My heart sank as I opened it. Alan, last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. Claudia, me too. I've missed this side of us. The words blurred as I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. The messages were brief, but their meaning was unmistakable. My wife, the woman I'd loved for over 2 decades, was having an affair. I locked her phone and placed it back on the nightstand, my hands trembling. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I sat in the living room, consumed by a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. Was this a dream or reality? Slowly, I lifted my head, clear and present, and faced what was left of my life. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I needed to confront her. Over breakfast, I broke the silence. "Claudia, who's Alan?" The mug in her hand froze mid-air, her expression shifting from surprise to caution. "Alan? He's just a colleague. Why?" "Huh? A colleague you had dinner with at Bistro Verona?" I asked, keeping my tone measured. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered. "It was a work dinner. I didn't think it was worth mentioning." "Really?" I leaned forward, my gaze fixed on her. "Because your colleague seems awfully comfortable texting you about how perfect the night was." Her face turned pale. "You went through my phone?" "I did," I admitted, my voice rising. "And I wish I hadn't. Because now I can't unsee the lies, Claudia. The dinners, the messages. How long has this been going on?" She pushed her chair back, standing abruptly. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I snapped, my composure slipping. Claudia ran a hand through her hair, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how it happened. Alan is just someone I connected with. It started as nothing, but it didn't stay nothing, did it?" I cut her off. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us." Her tears spilled over, but I felt no sympathy. Not yet. "Luke, I never meant for it to go this far. I swear "Stop," I said, my voice cold. "I need time to think." I grabbed my keys and left, leaving her standing there sobbing. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Memories of our life together played like a cruel montage in my mind. Our wedding, the births of Ethan and Harper, vacations, anniversaries. How had we come to this? Finally, I found myself parked at the beach, the waves crashing against the shore in a rhythm that felt both calming and mocking. I called Ethan. "Hey, Dad," he answered, his voice chipper. "Ethan, I need to tell you something," I began, my voice cracking. "Your mom and we're going through something right now." "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone instantly serious. I hesitated, not wanting to burden him with the full weight of the truth. "We've hit a rough patch. I'm not sure where things are going. I need some time to adjust from this bad news to my mind." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Do you want me to come home?" "No," I said quickly. "Focus on school. I'll figure this out." "All right," he said, his voice tinged with worry. "But if you need me, I'm here." "Thanks, son." As the call ended, I felt a small measure of comfort, but I knew this was just the beginning of a painful road ahead. Returning home that evening, I found Claudia in the living room, curled up on the couch, her face streaked with dried tears. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of guilt and apprehension. "Did you think things through?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. I ignored her question and went straight to my study, shutting the door behind me. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop. If Claudia wasn't going to tell me the full story, I'd uncover it myself. Henry sighed reluctantly and began to tap into his laptop. Starting with Alan, I searched his name alongside her advertising agency. It didn't take long to find him. Alan Robertson, Senior Account Manager. His LinkedIn profile painted a picture of success, sharp suits, awards, and a winning smile that now filled me with rage. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. Using the family laptop, I accessed the shared cloud account where Claudia often saved work files. It didn't take long to find a folder labeled Presentations. Most of it was routine, a PowerPoint deck here, a strategy document there. But tucked within was a photo. It was from a corporate retreat last month, Claudia and Alan stood side by side, holding glasses of champagne. His hand rested lightly on her lower back, a pose too familiar for my liking. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. How many other moments like this had I missed? The next day I called Nate, my oldest friend. He'd known Claudia almost as long as I had, and I trusted him implicitly. "Hey, Luke," he greeted cheerfully. "What's up?" I didn't mince words. "I think Claudia's having an affair." The line went silent for a moment. "What? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without walking in on it," I said bitterly. I told him about the texts, the receipt, the photo. "Man," Nate sighed, "I don't even know what to say. Do you want advice, or are you just venting?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm lost, Nate. I don't know whether to fight for this marriage or just let it burn." "You need to figure out what you want," he said firmly. "If you think there's a chance to rebuild, you need to talk to her. Lay it all out. But if you're done, then be done. Don't torture yourself." His words hung heavy in the air long after the call ended. That evening, Claudia approached me as I sat in the kitchen, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Luke, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond, staring into the amber liquid as if it held the answers I sought. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, stepping closer, "but I'm begging you, don't give up on us. I'll end it with Alan. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I finally looked up, my eyes locking with hers. "Why, Claudia? Why did you do it?" Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I don't know. I was stupid, selfish. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said coldly. "You destroyed everything we built." Silence. "Depression?" "I'll fix it," she whispered. "If you'll let me, I'll fix it." Her words lingered in the air, but I didn't know if I could believe them. Whatever. Later that night, I lay awake in the guest room staring at the ceiling. Claudia's tearful plea replayed in my mind. Could I forgive her? Could we rebuild what was broken? By morning, I had my answer. When Claudia came into the kitchen, I was waiting for her. "We're going to therapy," I said firmly. "If we have any chance of saving this, we need help." "Real help." Her face lit with a glimmer of hope. "I'll do it, whatever it takes. But," I added, my tone sharp, "if I ever find out you've been in contact with Alan again, we're done. No second chances." She nodded vigorously. "You won't, I swear." For the first time in days, I felt a faint sense of control. But the road ahead was still uncertain, and I knew this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey. "We will be fine," she said, taking a hand of mine. Therapy sessions began a week later. Claudia and I sat in a small, dimly lit room across from Dr. Bennett, a calm and composed therapist with kind but probing eyes. It felt strange to air out our private struggles in front of a stranger, but I knew we needed guidance. "Luke," Dr. Bennett began, "why don't you tell me how you're feeling about everything that's happened?" I hesitated, glancing at Claudia. Her face was drawn with guilt, her hands nervously twisting a tissue. "I feel betrayed," I said finally, "like the life we built together was a lie, and I don't know if I can trust her again." Claudia flinched but nodded. "I deserve that," she said softly. "But I swear, Luke, it wasn't about replacing you. It was a stupid escape, a mistake." "A mistake?" I shot back. "You don't accidentally text someone about how perfect the night was. You don't stumble into an affair." Dr. Bennett intervened gently. "Let's focus on the present. Claudia, you say it was a mistake. What are you willing to do to repair the damage?" "I'll do anything," she said quickly. "Cut all ties with Alan, quit my job if I have to, whatever it takes to prove to Luke that I'm committed." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just that, words. True to her promise, Claudia handed me her phone and showed me the text she'd sent Alan. "This has to stop. I can't continue. Don't contact me again." She blocked his number and deleted his contact information. It was a small gesture, but it gave me a sliver of hope. Still, doubts gnawed at me. I decided to investigate further, hiring a private investigator, Jim Harlow, to ensure Alan stayed out of our lives. "Don't worry," Jim assured me when we met in a nondescript cafe. "I'll be discreet. You'll have the answers you need." Days turned into weeks, and while the PI worked, I tried to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. Claudia was attentive, almost overly so, constantly asking how I was feeling, cooking my favorite meals, and suggesting outings to places we hadn't visited in years. It felt forced, like she was trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. 3 weeks after hiring Jim, I received a call. "Luke," he said, his tone serious, "I've got something." I met him in his office, where he handed me a folder. Inside were photos. Alan with another woman. She was tall, blonde, and laughing as Alan held her hand outside a hotel. "This was 2 nights ago," Jim explained. "Seems your wife isn't the only one he's been seeing." A wave of conflicting emotions hit me. Relief that Claudia wasn't still involved with him, anger that this man had wrecked my marriage while juggling another affair, but most of all confusion. Did this mean Claudia's affair had truly ended? "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned, knowing perfectly well what she meant when she said it. Did this mean Claudia's affair had truly ended? That night I confronted Claudia. "Why Alan?" I asked bluntly. "What was it about him?" She looked away, her voice trembling. "I don't know. He made me feel noticed, special, like I wasn't just a wife or a coworker, like I mattered." Her words stung. "And I didn't make you feel that way." "Luke, you did," she said quickly. "But after 23 years, it's easy to lose sight of that. I never stopped loving you. I was just lost." Her admission felt both honest and infuriating. "You could have told me you felt that way," I said, my voice rising. "We could have fixed this together." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I was selfish, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You deserve the truth." Attached was a video. My heart sank as I clicked play. It was security footage from a hotel. Alan and Claudia entering a room together. The timestamp? A week after she'd promised to end things. Rage and heartbreak exploded within me. Claudia had lied. Again. She had reminded me of our daughter in Budapest, the repressed arrow of her greater tragedy. That night I confronted her, showing her the video. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice shaking. 2 days? Her face went pale as she watched the footage. "Luke, I can't." "You can't, or you won't," I roared. "You promised me, Claudia. You swore it was over." She crumbled into sobs, her words barely coherent. I didn't know how to stop. I thought it was the last time. I thought..." "You thought wrong," I spat, storming out of the house. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts a whirlwind of rage and betrayal. The image of Claudia and Alan entering that hotel room played on a loop in my mind, each replay cutting deeper than the last. How many times could she promise me change and shatter it in the same breath? Around midnight I found myself parked outside Nate's house, He opened the door in sweatpants, his face creased with concern. "Luke, what's going on?" "She lied again, Nate," I said, my voice hollow. "She said it was over, but there's proof it wasn't." Nate gestured for me to come in. "You need to make a decision, man. This back and forth, it's killing you." I nodded, but no answers came. I stayed on Nate's couch that night, consumed by a restless, dreamless haze. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly, text after text from Claudia. "Luke, please come home. We need to talk. I'll explain everything if you just give me a chance." I ignored her messages, even as guilt gnawed at me. By the time I returned home that evening, Claudia was waiting, her face pale and drawn. "Luke, I've been a fool," she began, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, I need you to understand." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Then start talking." Claudia took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It started when I ran into Alan at a conference last year. We dated briefly in college before you and I met. Seeing him brought back memories, I guess." I clenched my fists, my anger simmering. "Memories? That's your excuse for throwing away everything we've built?" "No," she cried. "It wasn't like that. He said all the right things, made me feel important again. But it was all lies. I see that now." I shook my head, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "You didn't just see it, Claudia. You lived it. Repeatedly." She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I ended it after the video, Luke, I swear. He threatened to send it to you if I didn't meet him one last time." Her revelation hit me like a freight train. "Threatened? Why didn't you tell me?" "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I thought I could handle it on my own." Claudia handed me her phone, showing me a string of messages from Alan. They painted a picture of manipulation, a man who'd used her vulnerability to control her. "If you don't meet me tonight, Luke will know everything. Failed last time, Claudia, then I'll disappear." As much as I wanted to cling to my anger, the messages stirred a pang of pity. Alan wasn't just a lover, he was a predator. And he was responsible for killing people. To get away from the memory, he crumbled the bricks and the woods. "Picked up." "You should have told me," I said, my voice softening despite myself. "We could have faced him together." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. And now it's cost me everything." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I need time, Claudia. Time to figure out if there's anything left to save." The next day I contacted Jim Harlow again. "Find Alan," I instructed. "I want to know everything about him, who he is, what he's done, and who else he's hurt." Within days, Jim uncovered a trail of chaos. Alan had a history of seducing vulnerable women, many of whom were married, using their secrets as leverage. A few of his former targets had come forward, each story painting him as a calculating and dangerous man. Alan had a name for his self-described psychopath. Fueled by a mix of fury and resolve, I decided to confront him. With Jim's help, I tracked Alan to a coffee shop near his office. When I entered, his eyes widened in recognition. "Luke," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "Didn't expect to see you here." I sat down, my gaze steady. "This ends now." Alan smirked, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You've made a career out of destroying lives," I said, my voice low but firm. "But you won't destroy mine. If you ever contact Claudia, or me, again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." For a moment he said nothing, his smirk fading. Then he leaned forward, his tone laced with mockery. "You think you can scare me, Luke? I don't need to scare you, I replied, standing. The truth will do that for me. With Alan out of the picture, I returned home, unsure of what lay ahead. Claudia had begun therapy on her own, determined to address the cracks that had led her to Alan in the first place. Meanwhile, I focused on rediscovering who I was outside of our marriage. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into hobbies I'd neglected, and spent more time with Ethan and Harper. Claudia and I continued therapy together, but the path to healing was far from clear. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, or at all. For now, we existed in a fragile truce, both hoping that time would reveal whether love could triumph over betrayal. Now, this becomes further expanded on. Weeks turned into months, and while Claudia and I maintained our fragile truce, the shadow of her betrayal lingered over everything. Therapy sessions brought moments of progress, but they were always followed by setbacks. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jim Harlow. Found something you should see. Call me. My stomach nodded as I excused myself and stepped outside to make the call. Jim, what's going on? There's someone you need to meet, he said. Another one of Alan's projects. She reached out to me after hearing about the investigation. I think her story might shed some light on your situation. The next day I met Jim and the woman in a small cafe. She was in her mid-30s with sharp features and a nervous energy that reminded me of Claudia's recent demeanor. Claudia's beautiful face lighted up when she saw me. Thank you for meeting with me, Vanessa said, her voice shaky. I wasn't sure if I should come forward, but I couldn't stay silent. I nodded, urging her to continue. I met Alan 2 years ago at a conference, she began. He was charming, attentive, and persuasive. He knew I was married, but he didn't care. He made me feel special, like I was the center of his world. And then, when I tried to end it, Her voice cracked. I've recalled feelings of depression since returning to the U.S. I finished, my jaw tightening. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. He had photos, messages, things he said he'd show my husband if I didn't keep seeing him. I was terrified. I felt trapped. As Vanessa recounted her story, my anger toward Alan reignited. But something else gnawed at me. A creeping realization that Claudia might not have been his only victim within our circle. Vanessa, I said carefully, did Alan ever mention other women? And contrary to the cultural assumption, her eyes darted away and she hesitated before replying. There were rumors. He bragged about having multiple connections. I didn't ask for names, but I got the impression he liked keeping his options open. That night I sat Claudia down, my mind spinning with Vanessa's revelations. Tell me everything, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Not just about you and Alan. Were there others? Did he have anyone else at your office? Claudia looked startled. Why are you asking this now? Because I met someone today. Another woman Alan manipulated. And if there are more, I need to know. Her face paled. I don't know, she stammered. There were whispers about him being inappropriate with other women, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too caught up in my own mess. Caught up or complicit, I shot back, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Claudia flinched as if I'd struck her. Luke, I made a terrible mistake. But I wasn't part of some scheme. I didn't know he was doing this to others. The frustration in her voice sounded genuine, but my trust was too fractured to be sure. A few days later, Jim called with another update. Luke, you're not going to believe this, he said. Alan's been arrested. What? I said, my heart skipping a beat. Vanessa wasn't the only one to come forward. A few of his other victims have filed complaints. Blackmail, harassment. It's all coming to light. The news hit me like a storm. On one hand, I felt a grim satisfaction that Alan would finally face justice. On the other, I couldn't help but wonder how deeply Claudia had been entangled in his web. Claudia was visibly shaken when I told her about Alan's arrest. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "For everything. I let myself be pulled into his lies, and I dragged you into this mess." "It's not just me you hurt, Claudia," I said, my voice heavy. "It's our family, our kids, our life. And now we're stuck picking up the pieces." Tears streamed down her face. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." I wanted to believe her, but the damage was done. For now, all I could do was focus on what came next. The weeks that followed were filled with legal proceedings and therapy sessions. Claudia and I worked to rebuild trust, though it was slow and painful. I couldn't ignore the scars Alan had left on both of us, but I began to see faint glimmers of hope. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claudia reached for my hand. "Luke, do you think we'll ever get back to the way we were?" I looked at her, the woman I'd loved and been betrayed by, and sighed. "I don't know, Claudia, but I'm willing to try. For us. For the kids." Months passed, and life settled into an uneasy routine. Claudia worked tirelessly to prove her commitment, attending therapy, spending more time with the kids, and distancing herself from anything that might tie her to Alan or their affair. One quiet Saturday morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, with no return address. Curious, I opened it and immediately recognized Alan's handwriting. "Lou, I doubt you'll ever forgive me, nor do I expect you to. But there are things you deserve to know. Claudia wasn't the only one I pursued, but she was the only one who walked away when I pushed too far. I blackmailed her to keep her near, but she never betrayed you willingly. She spoke of you often, her guilt consuming her more than any threats I made. I don't ask for absolution, only that you hear the truth. Claudia was my target, but she was never my accomplice." The words blurred as my hands trembled. Was this his attempt at redemption? Or another manipulation? I handed the letter to Claudia that evening. She read it in silence, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to tell you about the blackmail," she whispered. "I was terrified it would sound like an excuse." "Why didn't you fight back?" I asked, my voice a mix of anger and confusion. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I thought I could handle it on my own, that I could protect you from it. But I was wrong." Her honesty left me conflicted. I saw her vulnerability, but I couldn't ignore the betrayal that had led us here. The therapy sessions, the apologies, the effort, it had all been leading to this moment. As we sat across from each other at the dining table, I finally spoke the words that had been weighing on me for months. "Morning gray at last." "Claudia, I believe you're sorry. I believe you want to fix this. But I don't think I can." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Luke, please, don't give up on us." "It's not about giving up," I said, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. "It's about knowing when something is broken beyond repair. I can't keep living in the shadow of what happened. I need a fresh start. For me, and for the kids." She nodded slowly, her sobs quieting. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll always love you, Luke. And I'll never stop regretting what I did." The divorce was amicable, though bittersweet. We divided our assets and agreed to put the kids first in every decision. Claudia moved to a small apartment nearby, and we remained cordial for the sake of our family. Dr. Walsh said, Months later, I found myself in a cafe, sipping coffee as I read through a book on photography, a hobby I'd recently rediscovered. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a woman about my age, her warm smile radiating kindness. "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the chair. She introduced herself as Emma, and we struck up a conversation. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope, a sense that perhaps, after everything, life could begin again. Claudia and I co-parented Ethan and Harper with mutual respect, though our paths diverged. She found solace in her own journey of self-discovery, while I allowed myself to heal and embrace the possibilities of the future. The pain of betrayal never fully faded, but it became a part of the story, a reminder of resilience and the strength to move forward. Sometimes endings aren't about giving up. They're about finding the courage to start anew.